One thing Colin kept saying throughout the mechanic course was, don't forget, this needs to make money. At the time, I thought it was obvious. Of course it needs to make money. But recently, whilst building my toolkit, I've realised just how many decisions sit between learning a skill and turning it into a business. And nobody really tells you about that part. My toolkit started life as a simple spreadsheet, or at least that's how it was supposed to be. A list of tools, a few prices, job done. Instead, it turned into hours of research. Comparisons, questions, recommendations, and more than a little second guessing. Because every tool seemed to raise another question. Should I buy the cheap version, or should I buy the shiny expensive version? Do I buy it now, or do I wait until I actually need it? And perhaps most importantly, do I even need it at all? When I started this experiment, I assumed the main challenge would be learning cycle mechanics. And that was certainly part of it. There was lots to learn, and there's still loads more. But what I'm starting to realise is that fixing bikes and running a business are two very different things. Every purchase seems to exist in two worlds. There's a mechanic question, and then there's the business owner question. And surprisingly, for me at least, the business questions are often harder to answer than the mechanic ones. A mechanic might ask, what does this tool do? Whereas a business owner might ask, what does this tool allow me to do? And those aren't always the same thing. One thing most of us know is that cycling offers almost unlimited opportunities to spend money. At one point, I was looking at these lovely professional workshop toolkits. Everything was matchy-matchy, everything looked professional, and it looked fantastic. And I actually convinced myself that I needed all of it. One kit was 1,800 of the King's finest pound sterling. But thankfully I realised something. I'm not trying to build a bike shop. I'm building a mobile workshop. And that's a very different problem. In my case, every tool has to justify its existence, and every purchase has to earn its place. Because eventually, all of it needs to fit into a system that allows me to work on customers' bikes. During the mechanic course, Colin kept coming back to the idea that this needed to be commercially viable from the beginning. Not eventually, but right away. At first, I don't think I fully appreciated what he meant. But now, every time I add something to the spreadsheet, I hear that little voice in my head. Not, do I want it, but will it help me make money? And surprisingly often, those questions lead to different answers. The best example of that thinking might be cables. Now, if you're not a mechanic, that might sound incredibly boring. Actually, if you are a mechanic, that sounds incredibly boring. And trust me, it gets worse. Because what started as a simple question of, what cable should I stock, quickly turned into another rabbit hole. My original plan was to buy a complete workshop cable dispenser. And it wasn't cheap. But it was organised, tidy, and would have given me everything I needed in one purchase. Job done. But then I started looking at the suppliers, and their reviews, and then alternatives. Before I knew it, I was comparing bulk cable boxes, housing reels, and workshop stock systems. In the end, I realised something else. I didn't actually want a dispenser, but I needed what the dispenser represented. Inventory, organisation, and the ability to say yes to a customer. So I built my own version instead by sourcing the components separately. Was it the perfect solution? Honestly, I don't know. But I've noticed something else that's becoming a recurring theme. Some business decisions aren't about finding the perfect answer. They're about simply making a choice in order to move forward. An interesting thing is how it's changing the way I think. As a cyclist, I may have looked at those boxes of cables and saw an expense. As somebody potentially building a business, I'm starting to see something else. Inventory, capability, and potential revenue. For the first time, I've found myself asking a question that I've never really asked before. Not how much does this cost, but rather, how many jobs will it take for this to pay for itself? That's a pretty different way of thinking, and I suspect it's one that every self-employed person eventually has to learn. Eventually, the boxes started turning up. The chain tool, the cassette tool, the work stand, the torque wrench, the boxes of cables. Hours and hours of planning slowly becoming real objects sitting in my flat. And I have to admit, it was pretty exciting. Because up until now, most of this project has lived in spreadsheets and notebooks. But now it feels tangible. It feels like something's actually being built. So how much has this cost so far? Here's what the sheet says. It looks like a lot. It is a lot. But interestingly, it's also less than I expected when I first started. More importantly, most of the purchases have a clear purpose. Most of the impulse buys have disappeared. Most of the that might come in useful one day purchases have been challenged. What's left is a toolkit that's lean but complete enough to help me start, rather than a toolkit designed to have everything. And I think that's an important distinction. What's next is actually using all of it. I still need to solve the transport problem, and I still need to service my own bike. And eventually, I'll need to find people willing to trust me with theirs. But for now, the focus is simple. Stop researching and start turning spanners and hex keys. because the more time I sink into this project, the more I start to realize something. Learning cycle mechanics is one challenge. Learning something sustainable around those skills is another. And right now, that might be the steeper learning curve. For months, this project has been about the learning. Now it's about the doing. And for the first time, I think I'm starting to understand what Colin meant when he kept reminding us that this needed to make money. Not because I'm thinking about profit, but because I'm starting to think about building something sustainable. Learning cycle mechanics was just the beginning. Now the real work starts. Let's go.